A playoff berth for Tennessee in 2024. Will the 2025 path be tougher? Will it be easier? We're going to break down the schedule and give you a very early projected record for the Volunteers here in this video. And just a quick reminder, we do have a Tennessee channel. If you're a Tennessee fan, go over there, check it out, subscribe, and help us out. Tennessee did have one of the more favorable schedules in the SEC in 2024. And you look at 2025, of course, it's going to be the same opponents. We just switched the home and away. It'll be that same conference schedule, at least in terms of opponents. But let's look at that schedule. And before we go to that, let's look at the non-conference. So remember, they played NC State last year. Thought that would be a much tougher game. NC State turned out to be pretty disappointing. Well, this year they'll play Syracuse. So they're going to play an ACC team again. That game will be in Atlanta. I think Syracuse is going to take a bit of a step back this year. We'll see. But that, I think, could be a similar game to what we saw with NC State last year. They also play ETSU, they play UAB, and they play New Mexico State. So this is not a very tough non-conference schedule. And the conference schedule, again, is not that tough either. It's very similar. It's the same schedule as last year, just switching the home and away. So you've got ETSU, you've got Georgia, UAB, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico State, and Vanderbilt all at home. So a big opportunity against Georgia there at home. That's going to be probably the toughest game of, well, we'll see. It's hard to say right now. You look at Georgia, you look at Alabama, you look at Florida. Those, I think, are going to be probably the three toughest games. Two of them on the road, one of them at home. But they'll have a great opportunity against Georgia. And if they win against Georgia and they take care of business in these games at home, Tennessee should be back in the playoff, because I don't see them losing more than 2 games on the road. I think two losses max. When you look at that Syracuse game again in Atlanta, Mississippi State, bottom of the SEC. They play them on the road. And then Alabama, Florida, again, will be very tough. But Kentucky towards the bottom of the SEC as well. So, yeah, it comes down to those 3 games for me. Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Those will be the tough test for this Volunteer team. And you get one of them at home, 2 of them on the road. So it could, it very well could be a 3-game season. But I wouldn't sleep on Arkansas. I wouldn't sleep on Oklahoma, maybe even Kentucky on the road. Of course, Arkansas beat them last year. So there will be other challenges on the schedule. But again, if they bring their A game and they are a top 10 team like most people expect them to be, there's really going to be only 3 tests on this schedule. So the way it sets up, again, they're going to play Syracuse week 1 in Atlanta. That'll be the opener. Then it's ETSU after that. So you get an easier game against an FCS opponent before playing Georgia in a huge matchup. A game where, quite frankly, this could be a game where the winner goes to the SEC championship and the loser does not. I mean, that's how big this game is. And it's very early in the year. So Tennessee and Georgia don't always play this early. So that's very interesting to see this game this early. What's also interesting is where Tennessee plays Florida, because that's a game that used to always be at the, in the first month of the season. They're playing Florida the next to the last game. So that is interesting as well. But after Georgia, they get UAB at home. And then it's Mississippi State on the road on September 27th. So when you look at that first section of games, those first 5 games, that first group, Georgia's really the only test. I think Tennessee, you feel pretty good in those other 4 games. But Georgia obviously going to be a challenge. But playing at home gives them a real advantage. So a 5-0 start is possible for this Tennessee team. Then they get their first bye week before playing Arkansas on October 11th, a revenge game at home for Tennessee. You feel pretty good about that one. But then at Alabama, that's going to be a huge game. At Kentucky the next week, so back-to-back road games. Back home for Oklahoma on November 1st. So that's a pretty difficult 4-game stretch. Again, it's not horrible, but you are playing a pretty good Arkansas team, and maybe a decent Kentucky and Oklahoma team. It's hard to say at this point how good those teams are going to be. But obviously the game on the road at Alabama will be the biggest test with those 4 games. And then they'll close things out with their, they get their next bye week. Then they'll play New Mexico State November 15th. Then it's on the road at Florida November 22nd and Vanderbilt November 29th. So we talked about Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And if you break this schedule down into three sections, so you've got part 1, part 2, and part 3. Those games are split up. They have Georgia in part 1, they have Alabama in part 2, and then Florida in part 3. So those games are spread out. And there really, again, aren't too many tests outside of those 3 games. So I think the schedule sets up really well for Tennessee. And just in terms of the opponents that they play in the SEC, if you look at their winning percentage from last year, Tennessee's opponents for this year, they went 24-40 last season. That's a 38% win percentage. That is at the bottom right there with Texas. So you're talking about, again, Tennessee and Texas having the easiest SEC schedules, again, based off of what the teams did last year. So it's a very easy conference schedule for Tennessee. It's an easy non-conference schedule as well, unless Syracuse turns out to be a lot better than we expect. And there are no real stretches where you've got 2 or 3 tough games in a row. The tough games are spread out. So I'm telling you, this schedule sets up really, really well for Tennessee to have a big year in 2025. Before we get to the record projection for Tennessee, just a quick reminder that memberships are now available. Get exclusive badges and emojis, early access to content, much more. Check it out. Become a member today. So a favorable schedule for Tennessee last year, a favorable schedule again this year. What is that projection going to look like? We're going to plug in our formula to see what the projected record is for Tennessee. And this is what it's been the last 4 years. So in 2021, our projection had them at 5-7. They went 7-5. So they beat the projection. I'd have to go back and look at that. They must have had a really tough schedule that year for the projection to only be 5-7. I know they were coming off of some tough times, but still. You look at 2022, projected to go 8-4. They beat that by 2 games. They were 10-2. So both of those years, they were 2 games better than the projection. In 2023, projected to go 9-3. They went 8-4. So a little bit of a disappointment there, but very close to the projection. And then in 2024, projected to go 9-3. They actually went 10-2. So they beat it by a game. So 3 out of the past 4 years, they have done better than the projection. So keep that in mind. Remember, these projections are very conservative. This is not a prediction. We're not going to do predictions for quite a while, but this is just, projection with our formula. And so you see the schedule, and this is kind of the scale that we use. This is going to show you where these games fall. So 50-50 games in the white. Those are games where you're playing a team in the same tier, or you're playing a team that is maybe a tier below you, but you're playing them on the road. So the home field advantage does factor into this. 61 to 70% games, those are games where Tennessee is going to be playing a team a tier below them at home. But again, if that game is on the road, then that becomes a 50-50 game. And again, this is not what we use to do this formula, but just kind of a way to look at it. The 40 to 60% games, those are kind of games where the spread's probably going to be around a field goal, 3, 4, 5 points. 61 to 70 games where it'll probably be about a touchdown, 7, 8, 9 points. 71 to 80, now we're talking double digits, and then 80 and above, maybe 20-point spreads there, 20-plus point spreads there. But like I said, spreads have nothing to do with this formula. That's just one way to look at it, one way that I think can make it a little bit easier to understand, I guess. And it's just all based off of our tier rankings. It's not, there's no personal, I'm not picking the percentages here. I'm plugging in a math formula. So keep that in mind. Our predictions will be coming later, but we'll start with the easier wins, the easier games. You've got ETSU, UAB, Mississippi State, and New Mexico State. So Tennessee, and by the way, Tennessee is a Tier 2 team that they will, so they're in Tier 2. Georgia is the only Tier 1 team that they play. Alabama and Florida are Tier 2 teams just like Tennessee. So keep that in mind. So yeah, 4 games that should be wins. You would be very surprised if Tennessee were to lose any of these games. You feel very good about those 4 games. All right, so how about the games in the blue? Games where I think Tennessee, again, probably going to be a double-digit favorite. You've got Syracuse and Atlanta. I do agree with that. I think they will be a double-digit favorite in that game. Arkansas at home. It kind of depends on how good Arkansas is, but probably around 10 points. Kentucky on the road, probably the same type thing there. And then Vanderbilt at home. Vandy obviously much better last year, and I expect them to be, a decent team this year. So those won't be guaranteed wins. Those are games that Tennessee could lose. But again, the games in the green, when we do the math formula at the end, those are all counted as wins. Those are counted as 100%. These games in the blue are counted as 75%. These are games where Tennessee, again, should win. It would be a very big upset if Tennessee were to lose, but it's not a guarantee. They absolutely could lose these games. And then you've got who else do we have here? We've got Oklahoma. Tennessee is a tier above Oklahoma, so that's why that game is in the purple. Tennessee, should be about a touchdown favorite in that game. With Oklahoma being a tier below Tennessee, so if that game was on the road, then it would be a 50-50 game because Tennessee is at home and they are ranked ahead of Oklahoma. They're a tier ahead of Oklahoma. That is why that game is in the purple. So that is one that Tennessee, you don't want to take it for granted, but you feel like Tennessee will be the clear favorite. Not like they're going to be a huge favorite, but they should be the favorite in that game by, again, about a touchdown, something like that. So again, the spreads kind of work out as a good way to look at this. But Oklahoma at home, a game that Tennessee will be favored in, but it's a game they could lose for sure. All right, so then you've got Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. These are the 50-50 games. These are the games that could go either way. Again, Georgia is a tier 1 team, but it's at home for Tennessee, so that does make that closer to a 50-50 game. If I had to put an exact percentage on it, I'd probably could put it closer to 40% than I would 50%. But right now, it's hard to say because I don't know a whole lot about these teams and what they're going to look like with all the pieces they have coming back. But that's a 50-50 game. And then you've got Alabama and Florida as 50-50 games in the same tier as Tennessee, so it doesn't matter where those games are played. Those are considered 50-50 games. Again, games that could go either way. So those will be very tough tests. Again, 2 of their 3 toughest games are on the road, but you've really only got the 3 tough games, the 3 really tough games, and maybe you throw Oklahoma in there as well, potentially as a tough game. Then you've got 4 tough games, 2 at home, 2 away. So that does work out pretty well for Tennessee. So what's the projection? Well, the projection for Tennessee is 9-3. And, that does seem kind of low when you look at the fact that maybe they've only got 4 tough games. But when you have these other games in the blue, Syracuse, Arkansas, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, when you've got 4 of those games, odds would say you're probably going to trip up. You're probably going to lose one of those 4 games. Upsets do happen. These are not guaranteed wins. And so if they were to lose one of those games, and let's say they split with Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Florida, then that's how you get to 9-3. So you can see how it's possible. Again, that seems kind of low because I think the schedule is very favorable, but the projection, again, with our formula, does come out to 9-3. But keep in mind, Tennessee has beaten that projection. They've done better than that projection. So just my personal take on this, I think 10-2 probably is more likely than 9-3.